you should be seeing a screen with the beautiful, beautiful Japanese beetle on the about to take off flight. Japanese beetles, here in Omaha, I help oversee the Master Gardener program. And typically, it's our number one phone call is about the Japanese beetle. It's a shame it's such a destructive insect because it is quite handsome if you ever get a chance to take a look at it. All right, quick history about the Japanese beetle. They were accidentally imported from Japan in about 1916 in New Jersey, and they have steadily moved east for the past 100 years. They were able to colonize very quickly because we didn't have any natural predators, nothing to help keep them in check. And so we had all this abundance of food that allowed them to really take off and spread the entire East Coast. Sorry, my cat is being antisocial right now. But the entire East Coast has been infested with the Japanese beetle. Here in Nebraska, I was talking to some of my colleagues today, and Japanese beetles came into Nebraska. They believe that the Department of Agriculture believed that they came into Nebraska in about 1994 was the first time one was trapped. And they just kind of hung out and just the population kind of multiplied. And then in 2011 is when they really became an issue. That was our really first wide-scale outbreak here in Douglas Sarpy counties, and we started finding them also in the agriculture industry. So they, this one here, here is I think our most current map. I think we're close to 45 counties in Nebraska have found Japanese beetles or they have been trapped. Some of the counties have yet been completely infested with the beetle, but as you can see, they are steadily moving west. We used to think that the amount of precipitation was going to stop them, but as we can see, they are just moving west across the nation. All right. The life cycle with the Japanese beetle is pretty kind of like the bagworm. They do go through complete metamorphosis. And what they do is, let me see if I can move this. Nope. All right. What they do is they emerge in June. The adults come out in June. And what the adults will do is they will find each other, they will mate, and they will start to lay their eggs in about early July, late June, early July. Here in Omaha, we have found Japanese beetles. They are starting to emerge. They all don't emerge at the same time. So that's a protective measure for the insect, but they will start to emerge and they start to lay their eggs in about July. And it's much easier to control the larvae when they're small. And as they stay in the ground, they will go through the metamorphosis. They just get larger, they feed on the turf grass, and then they will overwinter in the ground, pupate in May, come out in June. With the Japanese beetles, unlike the bagworm, Japanese beetles are very cold hardy. Our past winter here in Nebraska will have very little effect on the mortality of the Japanese beetle. And one of the things I'd like to point out is that the ground didn't freeze pretty much across the state. It did get to at 32 degrees, but the ground didn't freeze very well this year. So that won't have any effect on it. But what does have effect on the Japanese beetle larvae is the soil moisture. We know that soil Japanese beetles larvae prefer well-hydrated, well-irrigated soils. So soil moisture does play a part. And both the adult and the larvae will do damage. So both the we need to manage both of them. However, when it comes to identifying Japanese beetles, this is always kind of the fun part. We have 4 or 5 white grubs that are common turf insects. And to identify which one that you have to look at the arrangements of the hairs on their posterior end. So you're looking at their butt to see which way those hairs are going to line up. And as you can see, we have the Mei-jun beetle that kind of looks like a zipper. The Mast-Schaefer is just kind of a random. And then here with the Japanese beetle, we have this tiny little V. So here we kind of have a V. To me, it looks more like a quotation marks. So to identify the larvae, you need to look at the posterior end and look at those hairs. Damage. This is one of the things that people most often comment about because they feed on over 300 species of plants and 79 plant families. So they are generalists. They can consume a wide array of plants. There's a good chance that if you like a particular plant, the Japanese beetle is going to like it as well. This is our climbing hydrangea outside our office. And as you can see, the Japanese beetles just go to town. They do a lot of damage. They're going to make those leaves lace-like, almost like a doily. So this is going to be, they can do significant damage very quickly. And they tend to favor feeding in sunny spots versus the shaded locations. So it was very interesting to watch this particular hydrangea. All the parts that were in the sun were completely defoliated. All the parts of the plant were in the shade. They were not touched. So it was very interesting. One of the most common calls that we get is on the linden tree. The linden tree is probably one of the top favorite foods for the beetle. And what they do is they start at the top of the plant and they work their way down. And they can do a lot of damage very quickly. Now, when it comes to management of the Japanese beetle on the linden tree, there's not a lot of options. The linden tree is a great pollinating plant. It is favored by all of our bees, butterflies, beetles, everything that does a lot of good pollinating will visit this plant. And I want to say about 10 years ago, there was a misapplication of a product on linden trees, killed a bunch of bumblebees. And since that incident and some conflicting research, linden trees cannot be treated with a systemic, and that is the neonicotinoid group. This includes merit, the one that Jody had put into the chat box. None of the linden trees species, so like the little leaf linden, the big leaf linden, all the other ones, silver leaf linden, cannot be treated with a systemic. So our hands are kind of tied with what type of management practice we can offer any type of relief. Like I said earlier, the Japanese beetle, if you like that plant, there's a good chance that the beetle will like it too. They feed on over 300 plants, hydrangea, marigolds, pears, peaches, hollyhocks, you name it, they do like it. So like I said, there's a good chance if you like that plant, they're going to feed on it too. One of the biggest challenges that I face as an educator with the public is grub management. A lot of people believe, let me rephrase that. A lot of clients will start the conversation out that they put down a grub control product in their lawn. That grub control product does not put a force field around your backyard. It does not prevent the adult Japanese beetle from flying into the landscape. all the grub management product is going to do is protect the turf grass. That's what it's designed to do, and that it does a really good job. So putting down a grub management product is not going to prevent them from coming in, so keep that in mind. When to put down the grub control product, we know that it's easiest to manage the grub when the insect is small. So depending on the product, we're going to start putting those down end of June is the time frame we start applying a lot of those grub products. And I do have some options I'll show you here. And so the best time to help protect the turf grass, not the landscape, the turf grass is going to be applying the grub product in end of June. One of the questions we get asked a lot about is the Japanese beetle trap. They definitely work, but they work too well, and the traps are too small to be impactful to reduce the beetle population into your landscape. Here on the screen, I have a journal article that worked on Japanese beetle traps on single or multiple arrangements for reducing defoliation in the urban landscape. And what they found is that a single trap up to 7, they don't do anything. What they actually do is they attract more beetles into the landscape. So each trap can, in an ideal situation, could possibly bring in up to 1,000 Japanese beetles into your landscape. I think it's 1,000. I have to look at my notes, but it's quite a few. So one of the things that we discourage is the use of the trap, because we don't want to be advertising our landscape as like kind of like Eat at Joe's, that giant neon sign. That's kind of what these traps can do. So we want to be really cautious about using this trap. Definitely works, but we can bring more into the landscape than we would want. Now, on the very flip side of things, in 2018, University of Missouri Extension did some studies on mass trapping, where what they found is that the store-bought traps are not large enough. They're not large enough to be impactful. And if used correctly on the perimeter of a farm in a mass trapping fashion, you could have some impact on the population of the Japanese beetle in that farm. But again, in a home or urban or prairie urban setting, this isn't quite practical. So again, the University of Missouri, they did the study. The research is right there on the board, and there's a you can actually look up this organic management of Japanese beetles, and we'll walk you through what University of Missouri did. It's very interesting, but again, for urban setting, not quite the best route to go. One of the things that you will hear extension professionals, master gardeners, garden center professionals saying is to go out and just knock those insects into a bucket of soapy water. It works. And there was a study done back in 2014 on what time of the day should you actually be going out there to do it. And what they found is 7 p.m. at night is the best time of the day. And what you can do is you can knock those insects off, get them off of the plant. The plant's going to be producing less of a distress pheromone, and the beetles are less likely to fly away. One of the defense mechanisms for the Japanese beetle is to drop to the ground when the plant is disturbed. So get those gallon ice cream containers, largemouth canning jars, fill it full of soapy water, and it's a great way to help reduce to get those insects off the plant. And it's something that has been successful on a small scale. So if you're interested, there is the research up on the screen if you wanted to do some light reading, so to speak. When it does come to the management of the Japanese beetle, we do have some options. For the grub control products, we do have, I apologize, I cannot say this chemical name, but the generic name or a common name is called acelepryn. Acelepryn is less toxic. It's a little bit more gentle on our pollinating insects than our neonicotinoids like merit. So again, I cannot say this name, but acelepryn is the common name for this chemical. There is a new BT product out there that has hit and miss success. When it comes to this particular product, different schools are doing research, and the results are inconclusive if it really works. And when it comes down to beneficial nematodes or parasitic nematodes, these are nematodes that will parasitize a bunch of destructive insects in the turf grass, your different type of white grubs, your Japanese beetles, so on and so forth. They are not parasitic to humans or pets, so that's always good to know. And there is a new pathogen on the research stage. I have a link about this information here in just a second. When we want to manage the adults, when it comes to adults, hand picking is going to be your best defense. Again, after 7 o'clock at night, you have your less toxic options such as neem oil, piola, and then you have your permethrins and pyrethrins. So those are good contact products. But you want to keep in mind that a lot of our contact insecticides will work on the Japanese beetles, but they're not exclusive to the beetle. So we have there's a chance we could do damage to non-target pests, such as our beneficials that are often feeding, like the real bug that will feed on the Japanese beetle and are pollinating insects. So you really want to be mindful when you're out there applying those products. So because we don't want to do any damage that unintended consequences of applying those pesticides. And then I know this is really short, but wanted to wrap up with, there's a product out there called milky spores. This is a bacteria. It's been recently, a new genus name has been assigned to it. It is a bacteria that is supposed to help infect the Japanese beetle white grub, and it will get the milky spore disease that will kill it. A lot of schools have tried to replicate the studies that, or the claim to fame of this particular product, and they have not been successful. There's a couple of different reasons why they may not be as successful as some entomologists out east think that have the beetles adapted to this particular bacteria, or is the bacteria not as aggressive as it once was? And so there's a lot of doubt and some controversy about how effective of this product might be. Milky spores will only work on the white grub of the Japanese beetle. It's not going to work on our May June bug, our Mass Schaefer, any of those other grubs that actually bother our turf grass area. However, there is some new research coming out. I posted that research here about a new microsporidian pathogen that they are looking into to see if this might be a viable organic lower toxic option to help manage the white grub of the Japanese beetle. It's going to be interesting to see how this progresses. But if there's any, if you get bored some evening, that's another journal that you could pull up and read about.